So you cannot help another person to regulate themselves, which is exactly what a child who's melting down needs. And you can't actually connect and creative problem solve or adapt or anticipate and co-regulate if you're not already regulated. So this is a crucial topic because parents, when they have a child with needs especially, put so much energy into what does my child need that they often neglect themselves, not realizing they're actually the most important link in their child thriving.
Welcome to the Baby Sleep Connection, a podcast that explores baby sleep and more through the lens of attachment and development. I'm your host, Heather Boyd. I'm a mom of 3, an occupational therapist, and a certified infant and family sleep specialist. If you are a tired parent who wants to support your baby's sleep holistically, keep listening as we delve into approaches that go well beyond the usual strategies of wake windows and bedtime routines. Your baby's sleep is connected with so much more.
Hello and welcome back to this next episode of the Baby Sleep Connection. I am so excited today to have Sara Intonato on as a guest. This is going to be a great conversation for both the sleep clients I have who are navigating parenthood overall, and for those of you navigating special needs. So Sara, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I would love, Sara, for you to introduce yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Sure. I am a neurodiverse parenting consultant. I work with families who have children with mainly autism and ADHD, but really all different kinds of needs and disabilities. And of course, I'm a parent in that vein myself. I have 2 children. My son, who is 14, is neurodiverse. He's on the autism spectrum and a non-speaker. Really, he does speak, but it's very, very limited. So he's classified as a non-speaker. And my daughter, who's 12 and a half, is neurotypical, normally developing. So I have 2 very unique parenting experiences, 2 very unique children. And it's been quite a journey. And really, I owe where I am now to my son, Rocco. And I thought I was going to be Sara, the yoga teacher, forever. I am a 20-year plus yoga teacher and devoted practitioner. I still do my spiritual practice every day. And that to me is like my medicine. So I thought this was going to be my career forever. I maintained my own program, had many different iterations of teaching yoga to groups, to one-on-one, to leading international retreats, to corporate engagements. And then as I started to do my own healing around my son's diagnosis, which was a traumatic event in my life personally, I just kept on using my spiritual tools for that reason. And then it wasn't until he was probably 9 or 10 years old that I sort of picked my head up and looked around at the other parents of this population and realized they were not thriving. And they didn't have the tools that I had. And that simple thing of caring for myself that I took for granted so many years because it was just what I knew how to do automatically is something that parents are not instructed to do when their child is diagnosed with something. They're not encouraged to do it. Certainly society praises martyrdom and being overly busy and kind of sacrificing yourself for other people. And so I realized that that very simple thing of grounding and caring for myself every single day, it literally saved my life, I'm going to say on many occasions. And I don't say that lightly. So that's how I got to where I am today, working with families in my consulting practice. And I thought that as I started coaching more and more parents, I would be leaving the yoga world behind. And I've been really pleased to see that these tools have very much spilled over into the coaching and consulting that I do, not just with parents, but with organizations, corporations, and all different types of people. So it's a pleasure to serve in this way that feels like it was divinely guided somehow. And it's a pleasure to be here sharing with others.
That's fantastic. And I think even though you haven't mentioned it yet, I'm going to mention it now because I will probably be pulling some quotes from it. You are also the author of a new book. Well, maybe not new. I don't even know the date it came out, but it is the emotional healing for parents of children with autism, the journey you never expected to take.
Yes, that book was published in November of 2023, so less than 6 months ago, and it hit #1 on the bestseller list within 24 hours. particularly in the autism category, which was very important to me because I wanted to make sure it was getting into the families who really needed it most. So while it hit #1 bestseller in many other categories too, that particular category really gave me so much gratitude to know that it was getting into the hands of families who needed tools more than others, who have been often kind of tossed aside more than other populations have. And I love that so many people give me great feedback about the book and take tools from it, because that's what it's for. It's not just meant to be a book that you read and put away on the shelf and never touch again. It's meant to be a guide manual with actual tangible tools that you can use on a daily basis to help yourself exactly how I did for many years and still do as a parent to a child with needs. So thank you for mentioning the book. Sometimes, when you're parenting, it just feels like there's so many things going on that you don't forget your achievements, but you're always sort of on to the next thing. And I know many parents listening can probably relate to that. So yeah, I'm glad that the book is now out there helping people. That was what it was intended to do.
Well, it's funny you should mention that idea of you accomplish something, then move on to the next thing in parenthood, because there's always the next thing to worry about, the next problem to solve, or the next problem to anticipate that hasn't even happened yet that you start ruminating and worrying about, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll give you an example of that. So my son came home from school sick today. And the only time he ever really has agitation or behaviors is when he's not feeling well. But when you're a parent to a child with needs, particularly a non-speaker, and people are often trying to figure your child out, what could be making them upset, there's not always a clear answer. And I'm a seasoned veteran parent. My kids are not babies. I'm a seasoned self-care practitioner with a spiritual path that is really anchored in now for decades. I still, when I get the call that my child had an incident in school, immediately watch my brain and my husband's brain start to spiral into all the things that could possibly result from this moment. Are we going to have a meeting with the principal? Are they going to tell us he can't go to this school anymore? Because parents of kids with needs face this on a daily basis. I can't tell you how many of my clients get a call from the school, immediately go into fight or flight, start sweating, have to cancel the rest of their day. And the principal was calling about a field trip to the baseball game that they want to take their kid on next week, right? And they just need the permission slip signed. But the parents have already gone down to, mile 26 of this emotional marathon. And teaching yourself to not spiral, teaching yourself how to reel it in when you do spiral, are not only nice things to do, but they're actual tools that I think are essential for survival when you have a child who's different. Because I can tell you that with my daughter, she just goes to school. She does her work. She gets perfect grades. She goes to sports after school. She participates. She thrives. She gets this academic achievement awards. She has friends. She has no problem socializing. She is not just a neurotypical kid. She is a very straightforward, simple neurotypical kid. I just took her on a long weekend to visit my parents in Florida. And it was just the two of us flying together, I came home and I told my husband, I said, that was the easiest parenting experience I've ever had. Most of my parenting consisted of not letting her watch too many episodes of Gilmore Girls. Like, it was so straightforward versus having a son who really needs attention due to motor planning challenges, due to sensory needs, really needs a one-on-one person with him every hour that he's awake. And so there's a different level of energetic output that goes into it. And I think when you're a parent to a child with needs, you are aware that your life is different. But if you don't have another child to compare it to, you don't realize how essential it is to give yourself that energetic refill. And you probably need more of it than the typical person. So I know these are loops that we're going to sort of leave open and revisit in many ways, because they all kind of come back to, how are you caring for yourself? Are you regulated enough to handle whatever the day brings, whether it's a typical day, with work and kids and phone calls and stuff, or an atypical day where you have to go pick your child up at school because they're having a meltdown and it's not pretty and your mind's starting to spiral and you're working hard to bring it back, or you want to bring it back, but you don't know how. And this is why my work exists. It's a multi-layered topic.
Right. Well, and one of the layers you just brought up is that idea of self, taking care of yourself, and the energy that is probably always being burned in the background. That until you step away to refuel in a way that truly works for you, you don't realize how much fuel you're burning just getting through the day.
100%. And I've actually studied this in a different way, in addition to my yogic knowledge, because I am getting certified in relationship development intervention, RDI, and that's a modality that I've used with my own child with great success for the past 12 years now. It's given us that special sauce to connect and co-regulate with one another so that we can go on airplanes, we can go into museums together, we can do things in crowded, loud places, we can navigate new and maybe scary and anxiety-inducing experiences together instead of having to stay home because we live in fear of the meltdown. We have tools in our toolbox that can help us. And I meet a lot of families who live in fear of the meltdown and stay home. And one of the reasons that I've come to study now at length that often happens is because you can't co-regulate with your child or anyone unless you are already regulated. Otherwise, it becomes like the chicken or the egg conundrum, right? You have a child who's escalating about anything. Maybe they don't want to put their pajamas on to go to sleep, right? Like it could be anything, no matter big or small. And if you're getting hyped up in your own nervous system and you try to intervene with that child, they're just going to escalate more, and their escalation is going to intensify your escalation. And then it's like, again, we don't even know how we got started, but we're so escalated that we're blowing a gasket and nobody's feeling good in this dynamic. So you cannot help another person to regulate themselves, which is exactly what a child who's melting down needs. And you can't actually connect and creative problem solve or adapt or anticipate and co-regulate if you're not already regulated. So this is a crucial topic because parents, when they have a child with needs especially, and sometimes just a regular child, put so much energy into what does my child need that they often neglect themselves, not realizing they're actually the most important link in their child thriving. This isn't just cute speech. This is actual scientific language around regulating and connecting as human beings. So going back to that topic of regulation being important, it's not just important, it is the thing that is going to help your child thrive. And it's the thing that is most often overlooked because, as we mentioned before, if your child is diagnosed with something, you're not given a guide manual saying, hey, take good care of yourself. And if you are, it's very loose, like go to a therapist, but it's not, or go on date nights still, don't forget that. But it's very loose. It's not actually talking about regulating your nervous system and what that actually does for your child. So I'm here to wave the flag and say, let's make this not such a loose thing and actually tell you how and why it's important for your child so that it sort of forces you into prioritizing yourself, because I know every parent wants their child to thrive.
Well, I was thinking as you were talking too, the value of understanding what tools you can use to regulate yourself when you are in the middle of the storm, not solely as stepping outside the storm. Because there are some times you literally can't walk out of the storm. Your child needs you present, but you still need to be regulated.
Right. Absolutely. I published a podcast episode recently about a woman who I coached whose son was non-speaking on the autism spectrum and was having self-injurious behaviors. And she was very worried about him. He was having them in school. He was having them at home. It kept her up at night. Like she would be awake at 3 a.m. Googling, how can I help my child get through this? And what was really amazing is that her child had worked diligently on his spelling and typing abilities to communicate. So she was actually able to ask him, what can I do to help you, honey, during a regulated conversation? And he spelled out for her, Mom, you need to regulate yourself. But here's the kicker. She was still struggling with how to do it because in the heat of the moment, you're watching your child melt down. You're watching your child injure themselves. That feels like a high stakes moment for any parent. All you want to do is help your child. And, if you're like me, your child's not melting down for no reason. They're not engaging in self-injurious behavior for no reason. This is a way of them communicating something to you. And yet he was feeling her get her nervous system all hyped up, try to intervene, and it was agitating him more. How amazing that he had the ability to express to her, not with verbal ability, but with words, I need you to dial yourself down. That will help me. And yet she still didn't know how. And she said, well, what do I do? I can't leave him if he's injuring himself in the hallway and I'm afraid he's going to throw something or step on something sharp or, what do I do? And it really came down to looking at those simple things that really do work, that seem so simple that people don't do them because they seem so simple. They want to skip ahead to give me the expensive, complicated solution. In these types of situations, you don't have the ability to access those. They will not help you. What can you do that's really simple to help you ground and center yourself? So in that instance, we worked on some breath work for her to practice on her own, but then broke down pieces of it for her to do literally in that moment. And I said to her, what if you set a timer for 1 minute? And in that 1 minute, you say nothing, you do nothing. You let your child know, I'm here, you're safe and supported. I'm going to take a moment and do the breath work that we prescribed to her. And what was so wild is that it felt edgy for her to take that 1 minute because she felt so compelled to help her child. And I think every mom can relate to this, right? If your child's crying because they're hungry, if you have a baby and they need to nurse, and let's say you're driving the car, it might take you 1 minute to pull over, right? I remember having that moment when my kids were babies. And in that 1 minute, I felt so guilty that I wasn't able to help them. In that 1 minute, it took me to pull over. And this is exactly the same thing that she was experiencing in the hallway, watching her child be self-injurious because he was dysregulated. So it really came down to her reminding her, first, I have to have tools in my toolbox. Second, I have to remind myself I'm worthy of taking a moment to use those tools. Third, doing that's actually going to be the thing that's helping him. He's told me this. And having to remember that instead of putting all the pressure on herself to figure everything out alone. And so it's so simple, and yet in the heat of the moment, we forget that simplicity because we're escalated, we're dysregulated. We need to really practice utilizing these very simple and effective tools.
I keep thinking of that saying around do the hard thing when it's easy, practice when it's not a crisis or when it's not urgent, because it's laying down those pathways to be able to use those tools when it is not calm and when it's not ideal.
You just hit the nail on the head so beautifully because you are going to default to what's grounded in you, to what you're conditioned to do. I always say that when my son was diagnosed, I was conditioned to wake up in the morning and get on my yoga mat, even when I was tired, even when I didn't want to, even when I felt depressed at the idea of all of the autism related things I was going to have to face that day, which I had not planned for in my life. And yet conditioning took over. I had enough evidence of years prior to know that if I just woke up, put the yoga mat out, did as best I could, even if I didn't want to, I would feel different on the other side. I might not feel perfect on the other side. My problems might not vanish, but I would handle them better because I would be more regulated. So I just did what I knew how to do. So practicing when it feels easy, when you think you don't need it, is exactly the thing. And when I teach meditation to students, I draw from the Zen Buddhist technique of meditation, where you sit and you either have your teacher start and end your session, or you set a timer if you're by yourself. And during that time, it does not matter if a bee comes and lands on your nose. It does not matter if you get an itch. It does not matter if your foot falls asleep. It does not matter if someone calls your name. You do not fidget at all. You teach your body to release the urgency. You teach your nervous system that you don't have to go chasing every single thing in that safe, short time frame, so that in life, when everyone is demanding something from you and it seems like you're needed in a million different places at once, you'll have the ability to be discerning and to drop the urgency and really get clarity around what's actually needed in this moment. And that's a vital part of practicing these tools. And they take practice because our mind is the hardest muscle to train.
Yeah, those patterns we have, if they're not the ones that support us, they're pretty firmly entrenched, and it's rebuilding. When I hear you talk, and when I read your book about your commitment to that morning yoga practice, the word relentless comes up, that you were relentlessly committed to what you knew you needed, even if it would have been easy to come up with lots of reasons why you didn't have time, because you knew from experience, you knew that this was something that was going to support you.
I knew from experience it was something that was going to support me. And when I got on my mat every day, or my meditation cushion, I didn't question it. I didn't start my yoga practice and think, oh, well, I hope this helps me today. There was deeply rooted faith by that point that had been built over time, not on the first day, but over time, to know this works. And I liken it to waking up and taking medicine. Like if you have taken penicillin before and it worked for you, and then you have an infection and someone prescribes you penicillin, you don't take it and think, oh, I hope this works this time. You take it knowing, oh, this works for me. Great. I'm going to feel better soon. Maybe not today, but maybe in a day or two. And for me, that's exactly how yoga practice felt. And the backstory to that is I discovered yoga in my early 20s, maybe a little earlier, dabbling in it. But I became disciplined in it around the age of 20 because I had experienced really debilitating anxiety attacks. I was in a very rigorous program at Boston University. 9/11 had just happened. You know, we all told ourselves we were fine. We were not fine. I watched my friends go home and bury their parents, and it was a wild experience to go through as a young adult. And about a month later, I would be sitting in class and feel like I couldn't breathe. I would be laying in bed and feel like my lungs were cut off from the rest of my body. And I was convinced there was something wrong with me. So I went to my physician, who was great. And she said, Christmas break is coming up. You're telling me how you exercise, you do yoga. I'm not saying we won't look at pharmaceuticals, but before we do that, for Christmas break, would you be willing to just go to yoga a lot, like multiple times a week, more than 3 or 4 days a week, and then report back to me before you go back for your next semester, and we'll see where we're at. And so I did. And initially, I didn't know how it worked or why it worked, but I just knew it was the only time in my day when I wasn't thinking about anything. And it made me feel quiet and calm. And even if I felt anxiety attacks take over later in the day, I now had some breathing. I had some tools to utilize to get through them. And they helped. They didn't make the problem go away, but they helped me get through the problem. And by the time my doctor and I reconnected to see where I was, I said, I think these things are helping me enough that why don't we check in another few weeks before we do any type of pharmaceutical? And we kind of just took it like that, like a few weeks at a time, check in, see where you are. But I soon realized that yoga and these tools were my medicine. And if I was going to lean on them in place of actual pharmaceuticals, I better take them as seriously as pharmaceuticals. So that means if I wake up and take a Xanax in the morning, I'm not going to skip it if it's helping me. Instead, I woke up and I took yoga every morning, and I didn't skip it because it was helping me. And 20 years later, I still don't skip it because it helps me. And that's all. It's not a complicated way of thinking about it. And I will say that, there are so many different types of yoga and meditation out there. There's no right or wrong. I certainly found some that I enjoyed more, that had cool music or really cool flows, but I ended up committing to the one that made me feel like I'd taken a Xanax. It was not the easiest path, for sure not. It's Ashtanga yoga. It's very challenging. It was not the most glamorous. There's no music. You're just listening to your breath. It's very sequential and methodical. It's drawn from ancient roots. And there were a million easier things I could have done if I just wanted exercise or to have a fun time. I needed something that was going to heal me. And so this is what I chose. And I just took it as seriously as if I were taking any other medicine. And that served me well when I became a parent, and I was thrust into a lot of maturity really fast, 2 kids in 18 months. gave birth at home, nursed them both exclusively. And at the same time as my daughter was being born, my son was showing signs of delays and being evaluated for stuff. And by the time he was 2, it was like a full-time job, giving him what he needed to thrive. And yoga was the only time in my day that was for me. And I knew that it would help because it had helped me before. And I prayed that it would help me again. And it did. And that's all there is to it. So I think I'm grateful that at that time, we didn't live in a world of really active social media. And I think that would have given me more confusion, actually. Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I journal? Should I meditate for 2 hours? Should I do this type of yoga? Should I do that type of yoga? Should I do CrossFit? Instead, I just went inward and did what I knew worked for me. And I kept it simple, and that was enough. And now it's very much the same in many, many ways. So I think that's a really important thing. Sometimes you have to just put your blinders on and trust that you know yourself better than anyone else. And if you don't yet, going inward with practices that induce silence, like meditation and yoga, will help you to get to know yourself with confidence.
Well, I'm thinking about the wisdom of your doctor to take something you were already doing that seemed to help and say, do that more, instead of saying, like, go do line dancing. Like, I've never done that before. Well, it worked for somebody else. You should try line dancing.
Right. And I remember this was, I'm 43 now. So this was 23 years ago. Yoga wasn't cool then. You couldn't find a teacher training on every corner. There weren't social media pages about it. So I was going to yoga over Christmas break every day. And I would hear my parents whispering in the other room, who were very traditional, like, we don't know what she's doing. Do you think she joined a cult? I don't know. What do you think this yoga stuff is? I don't know, but it's helping her. So she should keep doing it. Yeah, I agree. She seems happier. She seems more grounded. And then when I went back to school, they started giving me money to go to yoga and keep going. And if you know my parents, like, they certainly did their best. They gave me more than they had growing up, but I paid for a lot of my own things. If I wanted to go on spring break, I was paying. I paid for my own textbooks. I knew that I was going to have to do those things for myself. So I was prepared to pay my way through yoga because I needed it. So when they said, no, we want to help, I thought, oh, they must really see something important happening here, because they know nothing about yoga. They think I might be in a cult, but they're still giving me money to do it. Like, this is a big deal. So it was a testament to what other people were seeing in my journey. And that gave me more evidence as a young 20-something, who could have been out at the club instead, to get up and go to yoga in between my classes in the morning.
Well, what comes to me when I think about that, how early you started and what the yoga scene would have been like compared to now.
Yeah.
But one thing that resonated with, among many in your book, was this idea of, it doesn't matter when you've decided that you're going to do something that supports your own well-being and your regulation. It could be in your pajama bottoms or the fanciest yoga pants you can find. Just unroll, and this isn't a direct quote, but unroll the damn mat. Like, just do it. Just show up.
Just do it. And I remember when I years later did get around to doing teacher trainings and becoming more and more advanced through the system in the United States, in addition to the system in India, that I'd committed to as well. Marianne Mitsinakos, one of my very beloved teachers here in America, who's based in Long Island, she's probably in her late 80s now, would often say, just put your yoga mat out the night before. So when you wake up, you see it. And maybe you'll wake up and go right to it. And maybe not. Maybe you'll have to get kids on the school bus first, or maybe you'll have to throw in some laundry. But if you keep walking by your mat, you're going to see it. It's going to call to you. And eventually you're just going to go and get on it, because your mat will keep calling to you, and you're going to know that it's there to help you, even if you're not in the mood. And she was 120% correct. Years ago, I coached a client as well who was a streak runner, meaning like you commit to running a mile every day for a long, long, long streak of time, years. There's a whole community around this. She would commit to herself that once she put her running shoes on, they didn't come off until she ran her mile. Some days it was 10 miles, some days it was just one. And that meant sometimes she took naps with her toddlers with her running shoes on because she hadn't run yet. That meant sometimes she threw them on the trampoline in the backyard and ran around it to get her mile because she didn't have a babysitter. But she always committed to doing that one thing as evidence that she could show up for herself. So I wanted to say that too, that yoga may not be your thing. Maybe your thing is running or hiking or cycling or meditating or journaling or whatever. Recognize what grounds and centers you and commit to that. And if you don't know yet what grounds and centers you, give yourself permission to go shopping the same way you'd try on dresses if you had something important to go to. You'd try on every dress until you found the right one. Same thing, try on every modality and have fun with it. Don't judge yourself for not being there yet. Trust that the right thing is out there and that you'll find it. And when you find that right teacher who connects to you or that mentor or that coach, trust that and nurture that. And that will usually be an indicator that you've found something.
Love it. Love it. I have the juxtaposition to that for those that have that self-talk of either self-judgment or are trouble, maybe cognitively, they hear what you're saying, okay, I can be a mother who shows up and give my kid what they need. But how do I not feel guilty, even though I hear what you're saying, to spend that time figuring out how to care for myself?
I think the best way to articulate that sentiment is describe a real conversation that I had with a mom who had immense mom guilt. And she got on a call with me telling me initially that she didn't know how to care for herself. And then as I probed a little bit further, I realized she knew exactly how to care for herself. She just wasn't doing it. She knew there were many things that she could have devoted 15 minutes a day to, and she wasn't doing it. And as I probed further and we got to the root of it, she didn't feel deserving of that time. Do you know why? She had a child with autism who also had a genetic abnormality, a disease or condition that he would have for the rest of his life, for which she was the carrier. So she felt like, how can I give myself 20 minutes when my son has this thing that she's labeled as her fault because she gave it to him, that he's going to have for the rest of his life? Shouldn't I spend that time researching for him, doing things for him, et cetera, so that he's set up for a life of well-being, even when I'm no longer here? And I called her out by saying, don't you think the best insurance for him to have a life of well-being when you're no longer here is for you to be here as long as possible and be well enough to be an active participant in his life for as long as possible, so that you can set him up with everything he might need in life to thrive at any age? Or you can do what you're doing now. She literally came to the call with a binder of things she wanted to research and do for her son. A binder. She had time to research and put things in the binder. But I had, what good is your binder going to be if a year from now you're so burnt out that you can't get out of bed? And that was a key moment. One of the biggest worries I hear from the population of parents whose children have disabilities, whose life is not, I'll use air quotes, normal, is they wonder what's happened to my kid when I'm no longer here. What's going to happen to them financially? Where are they going to live? Are their siblings going to be active participants? What if they don't have siblings? How is their life going to look like? They think about this at night. They lay awake worrying about this at night. So isn't the best insurance to be able to show up powerfully every day because you've nourished yourself, so you have more to give to the long-term planning that does have to happen? We're not going to lie about that. So that eventually, when you're on your deathbed, God willing, old, you had a wonderful life, you can feel at peace knowing I did everything in my power to set my child up for a wonderful existence, even when I'm no longer on this planet. And that's usually quite a bind for parents to feel like they're in, and they have the guilt of like, how can I give to my kid or to myself when my kid needs me so much? Well, if your kid's not just going to need you today, they're going to need you forever. Shouldn't you have the energy to pay attention to the forever part.
Mm.
You can't do that if it's like living paycheck to paycheck, right? Like if there's no overflow, you can invest for your future or your child's. But if you can find a way to be resourceful and change a few things and even invest a little bit, in the long term, it's your whole life. Same thing here. It's no different.
Love it. There's a quote I want to pull from your book that I think fits really well with what you're saying, Sara. How often do we expend our energy worrying about the journey ahead, feeling the physical ramifications of decision fatigue when we waffle in the shouldn't I space, only to realize the energy consumed by our mind chatter would have been well spent simply traveling the road ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a real feeling. And I think the only way to develop the faith and trust that what you're doing today is the best you can possibly do, and you can go to sleep at night knowing that and sleep well, is having something that helps you to go inward and really trust that you're giving your best, and also know when you're not, so that you can make changes without getting caught in the trap of judging yourself harshly, which isn't something that ever helped anybody change. So I think that's really the key, is if you don't have clarity, you're going to expend a lot of energy spinning out, wondering what to do next, questioning yourself, doubting yourself. And if all you do is one thing a day that allows you to connect with yourself, have clarity, trust yourself, trust what you're doing, it changes your whole life.
When I think about the clients that I support, who for the most part are neurotypical kiddos going through that immense burst of development, including sleep interruptions, and to remind people that that co-regulation piece is like a mirror, and that if they can realize that if they're not willing to do it for themselves, if they understand that doing that for themselves also helps their child, it at least opens a little wiggle room for them to consider that, to take that moment to take care of themselves, so that whether they are in the middle of the storm or in a nice little plateau of calm, they still have the tools to show up with that strong foundation.
Absolutely. And I don't remember if I quoted this precisely in the book, but I know I described it. But my relationship development intervention mentor, Annie, I write about in the book, who's still in my life, we see her every week still, said to me when Rocco was 2-ish, Sara, if he is not connecting with you, and she said this to my whole family, if he is not connecting with you or doing what you're asking him to do or listening to you or anything like that, he is not the problem. You are the problem, and you need to check yourself. And she said it to me just like that. And that felt like getting slapped in the face with a wet fish, like, whoo. And she was 120% correct. If your child's not connecting with you, you need to pause, look at where could I be anxious about how this is going to turn out, or judging myself, or judging my kid, or having expectations that aren't helpful, or worrying about the future, and clear that out. Go into this interaction as a blank slate and allow it to be what it is and blossom. And it's advice that my husband and I still talk about all the time. And we still use it to call each other out. If one of our kids isn't listening, even if my daughter's not listening or something, and, my husband's getting huffy about it, she's his preteen. We have those moments. I'm like, remember, she's not the problem. You're the problem. And it's like, oh, jeez. But yeah, we have enough evidence to know this too. So let's check in with ourselves. And it really does work.
Well, and it also brings up the part of your story where you had the opportunity and prioritized your yogic training to go away to India for a month. But that whole story is beautiful on its own, especially your perspective around, you don't need to go to India. You can find it where you are. But when you came back, you realized everything at home was the same. Your kids were the same. Your husband was the same. What had changed was you. And that's what allowed you to show up in the way that your kids needed, and to get out of fix it mode and be able to be there.
And to get out of overwhelm. I said in the book, and it was true, I was so overwhelmed that when I got letters from my school district, I didn't even want to open them. It was like I couldn't handle another thing. My bucket was already full. One tiny thing would have been the thing that made the bucket explode because it could not handle one more drop of pressure. That, to me, happens to every person in life at some point, whether you're a parent or not. And really checking in with yourself, what needs to happen for you to empty that bucket? And for me, I did what I knew worked. And also, there was a personal space component for me doing that, because I think when I was dealing with an autism diagnosis that we did not see coming, autism was not cool 12 years ago. There was no TikTok about it. Like, you didn't see adults getting diagnosed with autism at that time. And if they were, they weren't talking about it. It felt very isolating and very unknown. And that was jarring for my whole family, including the people who would normally support me. I didn't feel like I was able to lean on those people because they were going through their own process. And they still are. We all are. I needed to take responsibility for what I needed. And part of what I needed was space so that I could go into a place by myself and feel like I could undertake whatever process I needed to heal without worrying how it was going to affect everyone else in my life. That for me was a key component. And I think that I was rocked enough by my son's diagnosis that it was not enough at that time for me to do on my own. I also tend to veer away from talk therapy, and that's not to knock anyone who believes in it. If it's helped you, keep doing it. But I had noticed enough of how the nervous system worked that things like EMDR, things like hypnosis, things like yoga, Bessel van der Kolk talks about it in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, regulated my nervous system so strongly that I didn't feel like I had as much to talk to a therapist about after it was over. Not to say I was fully healed in a day, but it shifted my energy as opposed to talking, and sort of reactivating the things that had felt traumatic for me. So I knew that a deep immersive experience in yoga would really get to the root and shift things in a way that other things just could not. And I knew I needed that drastic of a shift to keep going. I also know my son's 2 at this stage. We've got a long road ahead of us. I need to be able to be an active, involved participant. And while I'm here doing the things right now, I'm not as energetically potent as I could be. I won't be able to advocate for him as boldly as I need to if I'm too scared to even open the mail because I can't take another thing. Yeah. And so I needed to do whatever it took for me to step up boldly, because that's the kind of person that I am. I want to show up for life in every way boldly. When I go on vacation, I want to absorb and enjoy every minute of that vacation. I don't want to mentally be somewhere else. And so for me, I just chose to get to the root of it. I'm a get to the root of it kind of person. When I was in my early 20s, a couple of years into yoga practice, everyone else was doing teacher trainings around. I booked myself a plane ticket and went to India alone and immersed myself in the yoga institute there. And what I loved about that was there was no teacher training there. Didn't exist. You couldn't pay money and do a training to be a teacher. You were a student. You showed up, you paid your tuition, and you practiced. And it still is that way. You are only given the blessing to teach when your teacher thinks you have practiced enough that now you can share from a grounded, centered place with knowledge. And it really was very healing for me to go there and just be a student and just heal myself. I wasn't learning tools to necessarily help others. Of course, it made me a much stronger yoga teacher. Probably the most powerful thing I could have done to have been a stronger yoga teacher was that. But yeah.
Well, and it feels like that brings us full circle to the beginning of our chat, where you didn't describe it this way, but I was picturing you feeling like your head wasn't even above water, and doing the work you did, it brought your head above water enough that you could start looking around and seeing that your head was above water enough to now then even consider supporting other people.
100%. I really feel like it didn't even occur to me to look around at anyone else until Rocco was probably 9 years old. We were filming the documentary, Rocco Up, at that time. And it was September, which is when in Montauk, where we live, they have the surf therapy events. So they have
Well, and I'll interject just to say that that documentary is about Rocco learning how to surf.
Yes, and it is going to be available to stream far and wide really soon, like any minute. So if you go to roccoup.com, that's the film's website, you can get all the news there. But it's a documentary short, it's about 22 minutes. And we were filming that starting when Rocco was 9 years old, so probably 2019. And the surf therapy events were happening. It was September. And one of our executive producers, who's just a guy we met on the beach, fellow surfer, who started this whole idea of us filming it, said, you know, Sarah, the surf therapy events are next week. Are you and Rocco coming? And school had just started. And routine, of course, is so important for Rocco. But I said, oh, Kevin, I'm so glad you want us to come, but I don't typically enroll him in the event simply because he can surf every day with us. I like those events to be for kids whose parents are afraid of the water, who don't know how to take them surfing, who it's their one chance a year to go surfing. And these events always sell out. They always have wait lists. I said, save the spot for someone else. He said, and he kind of gave me a little slap. And he was like, that's not what I mean. I want you to come to these events so that other parents can see you happy, thriving, enjoying your child, enjoying your life, enjoying your career, taking care of yourself. I'm telling you, Heather, it had never even occurred to me before that point that I was doing anything that could be shared with anyone else. And I thought, I'm just going to be with that for a minute. And a month later, I had felt called to write a book, thinking it was going to be about something totally different in the yoga space. I sat down to outline my book, and this is the book that came out, which was not the book that I planned to write, but it just came out, and I know enough about being in a flow state to not stop it. Just let it. And that's when I was sort of like, maybe I do have something to share. And about a year later, I started my consulting practice. I started my podcast. And initially, you know, it was just an experiment. Yoga was still my main thing. And slowly it transitioned to my consulting and coaching practice being my main thing. And yoga is still something that comes in that I do a bit on the side. But so grateful that I had that background because I can use all those tools to serve the families who need support in this population.
Well, and I'll mention as well, in going through your book, it's such a beautiful combination of both yours and Rocco's stories. Woven into every chapter is a yoga move for regulating or taking care of oneself, and journal prompts, which I found such a lovely combination to know that every chapter was going to include movement through yoga and it was going to include journaling. And I always think whenever I read something like take out your notebook, I think again about that comment about pajama pants or yoga pants. Like just take that lined paper, binder paper, anything, just write a napkin, just write.
Right.
It does not have to be a dissertation. It does not have to be in calligraphy. Just write. I wonder if you would share, Sarah, and I may be putting you on the spot, one strategy that those who are listening could, if it resonates with them, start using today if they're feeling the need to pay more attention to their self-care or start some practice in self-care.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite default tools comes from Pema Chodron. She was a female Tibetan monk who transitioned from this planet just a few years ago. And in one of her books, she talked about at any given time of day, when you're in the middle of a high stakes situation, you may not be able to step away and meditate, right? You know, that might happen easier first thing in the morning or right before bed. But you certainly have the time to pause and take 3 of the deepest, slowest breaths that you can take in and out through your nose before you hit send, before you turn the car on, before you start the conversation that you don't want to have, before you have to discipline your child or have a boundary put up. 3 deep breaths. That's it. And I love this tool because many parents in general have really full lives, but parents to kids with needs have full lives times 10. And I see the difference. I just took my daughter away for 5 days by ourselves. It was the easiest parenting I've ever done compared to her brother, who needs a lot more of my energy. And I often would see parents like me, whose kids are different, whose energy output is a lot more, kind of turn their nose up when experts would tell them to do something if that expert wasn't also a parent to a child with needs. It's like, yeah, easy for you to say. You get to go home to your neurotypical kids at night and have dinner together. And like your biggest issue is limiting their screen time. You don't understand my life. And I really wanted people to know, I understand your life. That's why all of these tools can be done in your house. If you can't find a babysitter because you can't just call the teenager up the road to watch your non-speaking kid who has behaviors, totally get it. You can do this a few minutes before they get up or after they go to sleep, or if they nap still, take a nap, or when they're in school, or you can just find a minute, even if it's 1 minute. And the mantra I would give for people when they employ that technique of just pausing and taking 3 deep breaths is, don't let what you can't do stop you from doing what you can. Maybe you can't get out for a 90-minute yoga class today. Totally get it. You can take 3 deep breaths.
Love it. Love it. Well, and the parents that have attended my courses and workshops will recognize that I always tell them they always have their breath. They don't need to go get it. They don't need to, etch out a huge amount of time. They always have their breath, even if it's while they're washing dishes, to slow down, to take the breath.
Absolutely.
I wonder, Sara, if you felt that there was something that isn't being talked about in conversations that you think should be coming up more.
I think, honestly, what comes to mind is my son's occupational therapist, who I love, happens to be my neighbor. Our daughters are friends. And we were in an IEP meeting last year. And she's also an executive functioning coach. So she works with a lot of different types of children with ADHD, intense needs, behavior needs, all kinds of things. She's incredibly intelligent. Her name is Lori Flynn, and she teaches school-based OTs as well. At one point, and it was a great meeting, probably the best IEP meeting I've ever attended in my life. She turned and looked at everyone on my son's team and said, I just want you to know this is 24/7 parenting. You will never understand how intense this level of parenting is. And she said, I just need you to know that you will never understand. And my husband and I looked at each other and we felt so acknowledged, because usually, and we have a great team. My son has the ACE of school settings that we've advocated for. And he's with people who love and support him and believe in him every day. And still, to be acknowledged that this type of parenting is just different. It's just different, not better or worse, just different. I still think about it and I still tell her, I'm so grateful that you said that, because I think very often parents compare what they're doing to what they see around them, which is often what's commonly done or what the typical kid needs. And it's okay that your life is different. It's okay that your level of parenting might be 24/7. It might be level 100 out of a 1 to 10 scale. And that doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. Acknowledge that it's different and just parent the child in front of you. I think that was the most powerful thing I ever noticed, because I really felt witnessed. I felt like someone saw the level of energy I was giving every day to help my child thrive, and how it wasn't normal. It was not normal, to have to hire an attorney to advocate for my child to go to school. It was not normal to have to teach him how to spell myself and get certified in a method to help him communicate as a non-speaker, because I couldn't find anyone around to do that with him. It was not normal, to have to invest in hours and hours and hours of paperwork, to do things that other families just don't need. And it was really validating for someone to say that out loud, to help other people who are not parents to a child like this understand that they would never understand. It was very powerful. I think of that all the time.
There's a quote in your book that really resonates with me when you talk about that, Sara, and I'm going to take the risk of running a little long today to read that out, and then I will ask you to share where people can find you. And you say there's very little attention paid to the emotional baggage special needs parents carry around from the moment their child is diagnosed, which was for me a traumatic event. I suppose the reason for this is because the moment a child is diagnosed with autism or another label that carries with it major changes for the trajectory of his or her life, the parents are also faced with a to-do list a mile long, involving paperwork, meetings, researching new schools, new therapies, new diets, etc. There simply is no time for coping, as everything in your life now revolves around your child and this role of special needs caregiver, which has been thrust into your lap. Certainly no clinician or administrator I have ever met advised parents to give themselves a timeout to do their own healing work.
I wrote it and it still makes me gasp hearing it, because it's like, oh, geez, it was true then and it's still true.
Well, and I think that's a wonderful way for us to close, because it really speaks to that balance of giving so much to our kids so that they can reach their full potential, but knowing that we cannot give from that empty cup.
Correct. And to close it out with a doozy from Moksha Priya Shakti, my very first deeply spiritual teacher, who I still keep in touch with, would always say, you make the time for the things you want to do. If your kid needs something, you're making the time. If you're not making the time for yourself, it's time to really get clear on why are you less important, especially now that you know your regulation is the thing that's going to help your kid. So now that you know that, you can't go back to sleep on that. We've told you. So now you know, your permission slip has been signed, that it's okay to want to make time for yourself. In fact, it is the thing that will help your child most.
It is the thing. I love that. Thank you so much, Sara. Where can people find you to learn more about what you do?
Sure. My website, saraintonato.com, we'll put that in the show notes, is the best place to learn more about all the different ways I help people in organizations. And there's a tab that says work with Sara. And if you're a parent, if you're an organization, you just click on whatever speaks to you and you can learn more about it there. I also share a lot through my Instagram account, and we can link that as well. You can also get that through the website, and my podcast. And that's the Full Potential Thriving with Neurodiversity's podcast. And I have really exciting episodes coming up. Podcast is free. You just need a device to listen on and your Wi-Fi. And we're going to be bringing on financial experts to help parents plan for the long term that they're so scared of. We have all different types of experts come on, experts in health, experts in wellness, experts in you name it. And I have solo episodes as well, where I share more about the things that are helping my clients and helping me as a parent. So those are great places to start. The book is a great place to start.
I'll be sure to link the book and the documentary Rocco Up too, Sara.
Awesome. Thank you. You start with whatever feels called to you and dive in. And I always remind people that I'm a real person behind the screen. So if anything resonates with you, send me an email, comment on it. I want to know more about your journey, because it actually helps me to keep serving and supporting.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time, Sara. I'm so grateful.
I'm so grateful too. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for joining me on this episode. I do hope that you found the information and perspectives in this podcast episode helpful to you as you navigate your baby's sleep development. Of course, this podcast provides general information, and it isn't tailored to your family's reality or the specific needs of your baby. If you're concerned about your baby's sleep or health, be sure to reach out to your healthcare provider. If you're feeling exhausted and overwhelmed and you need a place to feel nurtured and reassured, you can find me on Instagram at familysleep.ca. Until next episode, look for the connections that support you and your baby.